Welcome coding community. Do I have a fun class for you today? I have a class already up on the site using Bokeh with Django to render charts and visualizations. Today, we explore in detail a Django module called Django Chartit to do some of the same. The difference here is this works more directly with your database models and your associated data. This is a long class, so please make use of the table of contents to jump around to where you need to be to support your learning. Okay, let's see it in action. So what is Django Chartit? Django Chartit is a Django app that can be used to easily create charts from the data within your database. The charts are rendered using two JavaScript libraries, as most of them are, Highchart and jQuery. I have the website here for the documentation if you want to go explore that, but we're going to cover all the high points through this training. And don't worry, I will have all the links in the space provided below the video. So there are a bunch of different types of charts that you can create with Django Chartit, and I'll give you the link to the documentation where they give you the examples of the code. Here I show you a line chart, a pie chart, and a pivot chart. If you go to the Highchart site, move away from the Django Chartit site to the Highchart site, you will see even more examples, heat maps and combinations and accessible charts and style mode and area charts and a whole bunch of stuff. So you want to explore that. The difference there is when you look at some of that documentation, you're going to have to tailor that or modify it so that it could work within the context of a Django view. Now, I've done a lot of that work for you, but if you explore past this presentation, and I highly suggest that you do if you're interested in this, you'll just want to be cautious of that. As I mentioned on the previous slide, here is the documentation on the Django Chartit site. What they'll do here is they will give you the information on the models that they use, so you can just copy those right in. I've had to make some modifications for myself, I've noticed, but basically they're good to go as is. And then they'll give you all these different charting examples that you could use. So make use of this. Again, I will have this particular link in the space provided below, so you don't have to memorize this link here. Over the next several slides, we will be creating our Django project and our application. If you don't need that, please feel free to jump ahead. Here, we're creating a directory to house our Django project. I'm calling mine chartit_project. I happen to be using VS Code. You will see it in your IDE of choice like I do here. Our next step is to create our virtual environment. It's in there that we'll install Django, and then we'll also install Django Chartit. So the first thing I do is I open the command line and ensure I'm in my newly created directory that will house my Django project. And again, that's called chartit-project. I then use this command to create a virtual environment, and I happen to call it virtual_env. So the command is right here. On Mac, I have to use Python 3 -m venv virtual_environment, or whatever you want to call it. So if all goes well, after you're finished typing this command, you will get no output. That's fine. That means everything has worked well for you. You will also see your newly created virtual environment housed within your outside folder within your VS Code application or whatever IDE you're using, just like this. Here we're going to simply activate our virtual environment from our chartit-project folder. We will issue source virtual_env, the name of our virtual environment, /bin/activate. And you'll know you're in your virtual environment when the name of that virtual environment prepends your command line, just like I have it here. Note, you're not within your virtual environment when you run this command, but instead in the project folder that houses your virtual environment folder. Now, with our virtual environment activated, we are going to install Django, and then we're going to install Django Chartit. So using pip install for both, we'll do a pip install Django, just like I have here, and then we'll do a pip install Django_Chartit. You're doing great so far. Now we're going to create our Django project. So I've named it my_chartit. I do a pwd always just to make sure I'm in the right directory. I want to be in that Django-Chartit parent folder. I issue a Django admin start project, and then I call it my_chartit. Here, I show you that if you try to do a Django admin start project with the word chartit, you're going to get a command error because that conflicts with a Python module. And the Python module it conflicts with, of course, is Chartit. So you want to make sure you call it something other than Chartit. And I decided to call mine my_Chartit. Once you do that, you're going to see in your IDE that gets created, and I show it right here, and you see some of the files that you would expect to see if you're familiar with Django, and hopefully, if you're looking at this course, you are. We're going to CD into our newly created Django project. Mine's called my_Chartit. We're going to run manage.py migrate to initially migrate data changes to your project. So in my case, it's Python 3. For you, it might be Python. Manage.py migrate. Next, we'll create our super user so we can modify our data. We'll do this by issuing a Python 3 or a Python in your case, perhaps, manage.py create user, and then answer all the rest of the questions. Finally, we will create our new Django application for our Chartit project. So I'm calling mine Chartit app. So I issue a Python 3 manage.py start app, Chartit app, and you'll see your directory structure will look very similar to what I have here. And we'll need to make some modifications to our settings.py file. So open up your settings.py file in your project, and in the installed_app section, make sure you add Chartit in quotes with a trailing comma. Don't close that settings.py file too fast. We're also going to update it by adding in our new application name to the installed app section. So right below that Chartit application with the trailing comma, we're going to add, now this depends on what you called your application, but the syntax will be your app name dot apps dot the name of the class that corresponds to this application in your application's apps.py file. So open up that apps.py file, and you should see something like this. You know, the name of my app was Chartit app, so mine is Chartit app.apps.Chartit app config. Okay, so it should be something like that, but it's going to depend on what you called your application. If you called it what I'm calling mine, it should look exactly like this. And I should have mentioned this already. I have a few different offerings or courses on how to set up a basic Django application. So if this is at all confusing to you, then please go ahead and take a look at those. They're up on the site. So now we're going to update the project's urls.py file, not the application's urls.py, but first the project urls.py. So we'll be able to see the routes from our newly created application. So there's two things that you want to do. One is in the import section. So we have from Django.urls import path, you want to do a comma and then include the word include. Then within the URL patterns itself, within this list, you want the path, close quotes, comma include, and the name of our application, Chartit app.urls, in quotes within parentheses. Okay, those are the only two things you need to do here. Now, of course, every Django project has a urls.py for your application. It has not been created yet, so we want to create a urls.py in the root of your application directory and then update it with a route for our first route here, which is going to be for a home page. So it's going to look very similar to the urls.py that we created before. You'll need these import statements from Django.urls import path, and we'll make sure we have a from.import views. So those are our two import statements. Then we'll have our URL patterns list, and we'll have one entry in there so far. By the time we're done, we're going to have several, 6, 7, 8, who knows how many. But path, close quotes, comma, views, dot home, we'll call our first view for the home page, home, and name equals home. Okay, in quotes. Second home is in quotes. And this is just a tester view. This won't have any graphs rendered on it. This is just to make sure that our Django project is working. So in views.py, you can create this very simple first view, and then we'll test it out, make sure it works, and then we'll quickly move into creating all sorts of wonderful graphs. Okay, the moment of truth. Let's see if our Django project is indeed working. From within your virtual environment, you issue the command Python 3. For me, it could be Python for you. Manage.py, run server. You should get output that looks like this, system checked, identified no issues, and the URL, http 127.0.0.1:8000. Click on that, and you should see in the browser my first Django_Chartit graph. Ta-da! Okay, so two very important things to do. I mentioned at the very beginning that this particular Django module is based on jQuery and Highchart. So we must make sure in our templates that we include this. And you might be using template inheritance, that's fine. You might have a base HTML that you import into your individual templates, that's fine. I'm not going to do that in mine. Everything's going to be static. So make sure you include jQuery. I'm going to use the CDNs and Highcharts. Now, very important for jQuery, I believe we're up to version 3 at the time of this taping, but versions 2 and 3 will not work. They will not work to render your charts. You have to use the JDN for 1.x at this point. So make sure you do that, otherwise you'll render nothing and you'll be wondering why, like I did when I first did this. And also for Highchart. So go up to the sites, both sites respectively, and get the CDNs and make sure you embed those. You'll see that throughout this presentation, how I'm doing that within your Django templates. So what do we need to create Django Chartit graphs? Whether we're plotting a chart or a pivot chart on a web page, we will need to tend to these following steps. Number one, we're getting our data from models, right? So we'll need one or more models depending upon what your need is and what you're trying to do. We'll have to create a data pool or a pivot data pool object that specifies what data you need and where to retrieve that data from. We will create either a chart or a pivot chart object to plot the data in the data pool or the pivot data pool. And then we will return the chart or pivot chart object from our Django view to our Django template. We will also use load_charts, a special template tag, to load the charts to our HTML tags with specific IDs. So those are the 5 steps. You'll use those 5 steps every single time you want to render a Django_Chartit graph. Okay, open up models.py, and in there we're going to create our first database table called sales report. It'll look just like this, and then once we create that in models.py, we'll issue a make migrations and a migrate. So that's Python 3 if you're on Mac like me, manage.py make migrations. After you get all clear on that, you'll do Python 3 manage.py migrate. All right. So we're able to add some data easily. We'll open up admin.py and we'll register our model. We want to first make sure that we import it. So we see from.models import sales report. And then we add an admin.site.register sales report. Now we'll be able to log into our admin console using our super user credentials that we created a few slides back. We'll be able to access the admin console and this model for data entry, so we can add records by going to 127.0.0.1:8000/admin. Once we press enter, we'll be in site administration, where we'll be able to get to our Chartit app section, and under there you'll see there's one database model called sales reports, which is our one and only model. We'll be able to add records there like I have. You see here that I've added 3 records. Clearly, the meat of creating these charts happens in our Django view. So in your Chartit app application, find the views file and you will create a new view called sales. There's a lot to it. I'll have all this code up on GitHub, certainly, and I'll leave the link below. So we create a view to render the data from our model graph in the view file within our application. So please ensure all our import statements are correct here. So the ones that we definitely want to add are 1 and 2. We must import our models. You see here I have 2 models. We're only working on the one sales report, but I'll have another one soon for you called monthly weather by city. And then we also must ensure we import both data pool and chart from the Chartit module. The next thing we do is we will create in our view a Chartit data pool object. The data pool object specifies what data to retrieve and where to retrieve it from. In our case, we're retrieving from our sales report database query, right? So that's a database query, a stock database query for our sales report table. So options here underneath series is a required field in the form of a Python dictionary. Any of the series options from the Highchart options object are valid. And we'll get into some more of those as we go, but all of that information is up on the Highchart site. It's a little confusing to understand because, again, it's written in JavaScript, and here we have it modified for Python code, right, in our Django view. So the source is a Django model, manager, or query set. Here, we are using a query set in the code next to number 5. I could have easily just passed the model name like this and get the same results, because remember, we can use a model, a query set, or even a filter, right? A manager or a filter. So this is just using the name of our model, and it yields us the same results. I could have also employed a filter, like I did here down at the bottom, salesreport.objects.filter, sales, _, less than or equal to 10. So I only want to bring back those sales that are $10 or less. And you'll see that playing out as well. So lots of flexibility here in what data set I want to filter on or bring back. The whole thing, a filtered version, what have you. Okay, slide 2, still working on our view here. The word terms, this variable terms in our series, is a Python list. Each element in terms is either a string, which needs to be a valid model field that appears in your source object database model. So it has to be one of the fields from our model. For example, what I have here is month and sales. These are database field names from my model called sales report. Or we can employ a Python dictionary in this form that I show you here. Using the dictionary would look like this for this very same example. To retrieve data from multiple models or query sets, just add more dictionaries within the corresponding options and terms. I'll warn you, all elements and terms must be unique across all dictionaries in the series list. If there are 2 terms with the same name, the latter one is going to overwrite the former. So be careful of that. Moving right along with the code in our view, here, number 7, we create the specific chart we want to render. In this case, a column, aka vertical bars. It should say vertical there and not horizontal bars. So that's what the chart is, supplying the data source from our data pool. So that's how these two things play together, the data pool and the chart. So the data source is a required parameter which takes a data pool object that holds the terms and other information to plot the chart from. The series options is also required. This specifies the options to plot the terms on the charts. Terms, which is required, is a Python dictionary. Keys are the x-axis terms, and the values are a list of y-axis terms for the particular x-axis term. Both x-axis and y-axis terms must be present in the corresponding data source. Otherwise, an error will be thrown. Chart options, which is optional, we're going to get more into this, is a Python dictionary. Any of the options from the Highchart's options object are valid, except the options in the series array, which are passed in the series _ options argument. Things that would belong in this chart _ options object would be like the title and the sub. You can overwrite the title. It'll always come with a title, but sometimes it's goofy, so I like to overwrite it. So you can have a title, a subtitle, the legend, the placement of the legend, the color of the legend, whether the legend has a border on it or not, the width of the bars, etc. So here's an alternate way to express the chart options. I give you some examples there. We're going to show you more about this as we move into this presentation. Okay, and this is the last section that explains the code in this particular view. So C down at the bottom, here we're storing the chart object in the variable CHT, and we pass that as our context to our Django render method. This now holds the chart data we will render in our Django template. Notice we are specifying the name of our template as sales.html, which we'll need to create. The template might look a little different, but it's fairly straightforward and consistent for all the charts that we'll plot. So if we learn it once, I think it will last us for the rest of the presentation. So number 1, first we want to include our jQuery CDN here in our sales template. Make sure that it's version 1.x. 2 and 3 will not work, is what I have found. We do the same for the CDN for our high charts. Those are the 2 requirements. Then we have our load chart tags here. This statement will load the tags and filters for our given Python module name. And then we here, number 4, we use the load _ charts filter in the Django template to render the chart. This loads the chart or PivotChart objects in our chart _ list to the HTML element with ID specified in render _2. And render _2 is optional. You see, I won't use it in any of these charts for the rest of the presentation. See how this corresponds to the changes I've made in the render method at the end of my view. Be sure your view is modified to now look like this, and you're going to see that in the latest version of the code up on GitHub. But you see that I made a slight change here because I've been playing around with different configurations. But it's request sales.html, and now it's chart underscore list colon CHT as a list in brackets, in square brackets. And I'm doing that because I will show you in a little while how to render more than one chart, which is very useful. Finally, we create the div tags with an ID that is the same as the value for your load underscore charts value, in our case CHT. It's within these tags that the chart itself will be rendered onto our web page. And our final step here in our applications urls.py file, we create our URL configuration for this sales view. And it looks just like this, highlighted in yellow, the upper left-hand part of this page. Finally, make sure that your Python server is still running. We render our graph here as we go to the /sales URL. The reason why it's showing it like this instead of all three of our records is because I have a filter employed. See number 1 here? We're using this query in my view, filtering on sales that are equal or less than $10. So we get back only January month 1 and March month 3. Now we're going to take a look at how to chart 2 different graphs through one view. So it's very similar to what we saw and very easy to implement. You see here in blue, we have CHT, which is our original chart. And then here on the right-hand side, we have CHT2, which is our new chart. So we give all the options that we'd want to give. See, we make this slightly different. Here in chart 1, we're using a column type. And here in chart 2, the type is pie. So we should expect a column type and a pie chart. And then at the bottom in our render method, all we need do is make use of the Python list. So chart underscore list in quotes colon, and then inside of our Python list, we have chart, comma, chart2. That's all we need to do. And just a few small changes to our template. You see here for load underscore charts, we have chart1, comma, chart2. And then for our div tags, we mimic those variables, chart1, chart2. We have a div ID equals chart, and we have a div ID equals chart2, or CHT, CHT2. In between, I have a horizontal line to separate them, and let's see what that looks like. All right, one model, 2 different charts in 2 different glyphs. One is columns, one is pie. Easy as it can be, right guys? So at this point, something may be bothering you as it was bothering me when I first went through this course material. The months are numbers, right? That's not real user-friendly. A picture is worth 1,000 words. We don't want numbers, we want names. So Django Chartit to the rescue with this x underscore mapf underscore sortf underscore mts parameter to convert these month numbers into names. So we create a function named month name right here, and we convert the month numbers 1 through 12 through 3-character strings, January through December respectively. We then, in number 2, pass that function as the second argument to the Django Chartit x mapf sortf mts parameter inside of the chart object itself. Sortf is a function or a callable that is used as a key when sorting the category values. Mapf is a function that defines how the category values need to be mapped, and mts is a Boolean. If true, the category values are mapped first and then sorted, and if false, category values are sorted first and then mapped. Note, we have to do this every time we want to convert numbers to names for any of the charts that we are using. In our case, this is for the 2 different charts that we just took a look at and we plotted, CHT and CHT2. So let's take a look at them. Much better and more user-friendly here. January, February, March, straight through July. Notice I added 4 more records to the database, and instantly it shows up when I refresh the page because the Django admin console is so awesome. So onward and upward to our next example. Now, something that I found buried in the documentation on the Highcharts library, but not in the Django underscore Chartit documentation, are these added CDN libraries. We can get additional functionality that I think you'll find very useful. Once you add these 3 here, underneath the original one, more exporting and export data, you'll get all this wonderful functionality to download pictures of this in various different formats or files of this. So it's just wonderful to be able to do this. And you see on the right-hand side, when we export to CSV or into XLS, we are able to see the data traversing through in chart format. So it's very convenient. Here I want to expose you to yet another chart type called bar. So these are horizontal bars rather than the vertical bars. And I have the view here. You see it's very similar. And then I have the model that we're using. We're using monthly weather by city. Again, it will be up on GitHub. Here's what it looks like. Pretty neat. And what I wanted to show you here is this is the chart result with me actually hovering over that center bar for Providence, USA. You see that it actually shows the sales quantity as being 4. Later we'll show you how to hard code those numbers there so you don't even need to hover if you'd like that type of a view. So here we're going to show you a combo chart. This is different than the one we saw before where we had 2 charts on the same page or the same HTML page. This will be 2 charts on the same plot. And you see here how we have options and terms twice within our series options. This is how we create more than 1 chart in a given plot. We're using the same model, monthly weather by city. And notice here, instead of having CHT and CHT2, because we're using this always in one series option, we don't need to do that. We're simply able to just use the one CHT. But what I do need to do is I do need to have that second for the X sort F underscore map F underscore MTS parameter. I do need to have that second none month name false as the second object or the second tuple in my list. And here's our Django template for that combo chart. You see here that we have just that one CHT variable. It houses both charts as opposed to what we did earlier, which is 2 variables for 2 different charts, one after the other on the web page. We needed them in a list, you might remember. Okay, and here's what this looks like rendered. Pretty neat if you need something like this. 2 different depictions, 2 different views or glyphs of the same data. Up until this point, we've only looked at the Django underscore Chartit charts. We haven't looked at pivot charts. So now we're going to switch to the pivot charts. Using the pivot chart options gives us a means to group elements together. I find them very useful. The pivot data pool holds the data retrieved from various tables or Django models and then pivots them against certain category fields. I wanted to point out that it does say in the documentation for Chartit that both PivotChart and Pivot Data Pool will be deprecated soon, but I'm using the latest version and they're still there. It may be the case that some of the functionality that I'm going to show you can be recreated with the regular chart. I haven't tried that, but maybe in an upcoming training I'll do just that. So let's dive into these things and show you why I find them so useful. So this example will be a bit more involved than we've seen so far. The main model, we're looking at the models.py file. The main model we'll use here is sales history from the Django Chartit demo. I've made a few small modifications, especially adding the string method here, so we'll be able to see these more clearly. But notice how a lot of these models have foreign key relationships, many-to-many key relationships. That's what will make this so interesting for us in trying to group these things together. Okay, here's our view. You'll see that the pivot chart is a great deal like the regular chart. It has a data pool and a chart, and many of the charting elements are handled in exactly the same way. The usefulness of the pivot chart is that it allows us to aggregate values like sum and average and count and minimum, maximum values based on a Django database aggregation. You can learn more about Django aggregation at the link provided here, and again, I'll have it in the section below. Django aggregation allows you to retrieve database values that are derived by summarizing or aggregating a collection of objects. So here, if you look at number 1, I'm using 4 different aggregators in one dictionary. See how they marry to the terms object in the pivot chart itself. That's the key here. For number 2, I'm just pointing out that you can use the chart options to change the default title of the chart to do something more pleasing for you. It goes into the series underscore options sections of the pivot chart. And I'm going to talk about, before we end today, I'm going to talk about all the different ways we can modify the look and feel of the chart. And here, of course, is our template for our pivot chart. And since most of the heavy lifting is done in the view, this template's going to look nearly identical to its chart counterpart, except for the chosen variables, of course. Okay, so this is what this looks like. And on the surface, you might be missing the big to-do here. I have several different entries. Let's say I have 15 different entries, either for New York City or Providence. But what happens here is this aggregates them all, right? This aggregates them all in terms of 4 different groupings. The minimum book sales for each. So the minimum book sales for New York City is 2, and the minimum book sales for Providence looks like it's 3 or 4. It's probably 3. The maximum book sales, the total books sold, you can see the difference there, and the total sales for each. So it's aggregating all those data points, whereas before it would have given me 1 bar for each of my records. That's not sustainable. If I have thousands of records in my database, most of the times we want to be able to group these things. So that is the usefulness here. And of course, I have all those additional highlights libraries at my disposal, so I can simply export to an Excel file, and you see the actual data values right there. And as promised before, I wanted to show you how to modify your charts. This wasn't so easy to figure out. This took me a few tries because, again, it isn't shown in the Django Chartit documentation. And if you go up to the Highcharts documentation, it's all written slightly differently because, this is all written in JavaScript. So we're dealing with Python versus JavaScript. So I had to kind of do trial and error to figure this out, but I finally had to have it worked out. This code is modifying the pivot chart that we just took a look at, okay? But it should work exactly the same way for the regular charts. All of these options get created within the chart_options section of the pivot chart, or the chart itself. Inside that chart object is where this happens. So you see title. This is setting the title for the chart. It modifies the default. There'll always be a title, but there's some goofy ones based on your field objects, the names of your fields, your database fields. Sometimes, you put an underbar there. It's not meant for being human readable. Then you can add a subtitle like I did or you're going to see it like I will do, like I'll show you in a minute, underneath the title, which is also useful. It just gives it another little level of specificity. Then we have the legend. So we can modify the legend where it's placed. We could use a border. We can change the background. We can show if it has shadow to it. We can show it in the reverse. I'm going to show you that in a minute. And then plot options. We can show the values on the chart, how big the bars are, setting a radius so we can make them slightly rounded. I'm going to show you all that in just 1 second. All right, and here it is. Look how wonderful this looks. I mean, we can really modify this to our liking. So first of all, of course, I show the values for the bars here, so we don't have to hover. I'm also able to put the legend, instead of it being down at the bottom, all in kind of one collapsed list, off to the right. I was able to reverse the order of that. You see how the bars are slightly rounded because I'm messing with the radius value. So there's lots that you can do. This scratches the surface, but I think probably it gives you a good idea of where you can go. Now take this and run with it and do even more, and let me know how you make out and teach me something, please. I always love to learn. Okay, my fellow coders, thank you for watching till the end. If this class has helped you, consider helping me to continue to bring these classes to you and others. Helping is easy. Just do the following. First, subscribe to this Yogi Coder YouTube channel. Next, like this video and leave whatever comments or questions you'd like. And finally, share this video on any and all social media channels with your friends and colleagues. And as always, this presentation and its associated code will be stored up on GitHub at the link in the section below. That's it for now. See you soon.